A shooting is under investigation this morning on Billings South Side that sent one man to the hospital. Billings police responded to the area of 4th Avenue South and South 28th Street shortly after 10 o'clock last night. There, they located a 19-year-old man who had been shot 2 to 3 times. He was taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. No other injuries were reported, and an investigation is underway. In national news, the Capitol Rotunda is open to the public today and overnight as thousands pour in to pay respect to President George H.W. Bush. President Trump and First Lady Melania visited the Rotunda Monday, where the 45th president saluted the 41st. Mr. Bush's body will remain in the Capitol Rotunda until his funeral at the National Cathedral on Wednesday morning. His body will then be flown back to Texas, where he'll be buried on the grounds of his presidential library in Texas, next to his wife Barbara and daughter Robin. Former Wyoming Senator Alan Simpson, a colleague and longtime friend of George and Barbara Bush, will be one of 4 speakers to deliver the eulogy at the president's funeral Wednesday. The colorful Simpson told us his friendship with the Bush family dates back to the 1960s when his father, former Wyoming Senator Millward Simpson, sold his Washington, D.C. home to George and Barbara on a handshake. Simpson also recalled when he and his wife Ann invited George and Barbara to go camping in Glacier Park.
We had some great times. One of them was in Glacier Park with George and Barbara, just the 4 of us. Boy, we boogied around up in there. He was vice president. He was a very decent, wonderful, civilized man of great perspective, good common sense, loyalty, discipline, manners. I know manners is a sick thing. Nobody knows what the hell they are these days. But that's George. And history books, as every day goes by, will report him in a more positive way.
As for his remarks at Wednesday's funeral, Simpson said he first wrote them down when the Bush family contacted him 5 years ago when George first took ill and had taken a turn for the worse.
But so I've known for some time that on some unknown day I would be asked to do this, so I'm ready. I'm going to keep it light, and yet it'll be serious, but it'll be reflections of this man and his humility and his good humor and his love of America.
In addition to Simpson, also delivering eulogies Wednesday will be former President George W. Bush, former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, and presidential historian John Meekum. Back here in Billings, 4 new officers were welcomed into the Billings Police Department Monday, and while the police chief says it helps, the force still faces a staffing deficit. These officers were presented their badges in a district courtroom with Judge Gregory Todd presiding. This brings an additional 4 officers to the department's 153 officer total. But before this moment, the department was down 14% in its number of officers. Another 4 will start training at the state's law enforcement academy on Friday, while another 3 have recently been offered positions. That still leaves the department short by 3 officers. It's something Chief St. John says the force has tried to cope with by moving officers off of specialized divisions to help with day-to-day 911 calls. These new officers, he says, will help fill that void.
It's required us to retask some of our specialized positions, pull them off of the proactive duties that they do to help respond to calls for service. And so when we start getting people back on board, then we can release those officers back to their proactive, which is where we want to be on all of our enforcement efforts.
And there was a special moment for one family during Monday's ceremony. A former Yellowstone County Sheriff's detective recently retired from that position to take a job as a Billings patrol officer. The new officer's son, who is a higher rank in the department, took part in the ceremony and was able to present his father with his new badge. A Missoula County judge must decide if a homicide case should be moved out of the county due to media coverage. Augustus Standing Rock faces felony homicide charges along with his ex-girlfriend for the murder of 2 people back in August of 2017. The couple is accused of dismembering 2 bodies and storing them in tubs filled with chemicals. Most recently, prosecutors say Standing Rock received a letter in jail that was possibly from his ex-girlfriend and attempted to eat the letter. Contact between the 2 is illegal, and now the FBI is trying to figure out who the letter was from and if it's legible. The government is releasing new information about a growing scam targeting older Americans. It tricks people into mailing cash to people pretending to be their grandchildren. Victims reportedly lose an average of $9,000. The Federal Trade Commission says Americans lost up to $41 million in the scam this year, nearly twice as much as last year. CBS's Anna Warner reports from New York.
I'm the last person I thought would ever fall for a scam like this.
You're the last person.
Last.
Retired Tennessean Frank Stratton spent his career working in intelligence, first for the Air Force, later as a cybersecurity programmer. But his expertise still didn't prepare him for the scam that began with a morning phone call in April.
I hear, don't be afraid, but I'm the public defender from Austin, Texas. They have put your grandson in jail after a wreck, and he has a DUI offense.
The man said Stratton could bail out his grandson if he sent $8,500 cash via FedEx, something that might sound ridiculous, except that Stratton had actually done just that for a family member once in the past. Not only that, but the attorney briefly put his grandson, who sounded injured, on the phone. So Stratton drove to the bank.
I wrote a check out, and they gave me $8,500 cash in hundreds.
Then he went to a local mail location to overnight the money to an Austin, Texas address.
You know, a lot of people right now are sitting at home going, how could you fall for that?
Well, it's because of the way that they scripted it. They had it so well scripted. They knew everything about my grandson. They knew everything about me.
These scammers are successful at getting people to send large amounts of money because grandparents really care about their grandchildren. The grandchildren sound like they're in terrible distress. They're crying.
My wife and I looked at each other and said, scam.
Just like that?
Just like that. Boom.
So he called FedEx to have the package returned. And while he got his money back...
I'm a security person, and that's what really frustrates me.
Because?
Because I fell for it.
Even you fell for it.
Because of love.
Something Stratton says every grandparent can fall victim to.
Anna Warner, CBS News, New York.
The Federal Trade Commission says people 70 and older are increasingly being scammed, and the criminals do their research, sometimes using social media to learn about their targets. The FTC says if you get a call like this, get in touch with that family member before sending anything, and be careful about what you post on social media. Well, before we take a break, if you were saving your pennies to buy your own private island and mansion on Flathead Lake, someone beat you to it. Engel & Volker's broker, Don Maddox, announced the property sold to an anonymous buyer. The listing price was just under $14 million, but the final sale price hasn't been disclosed. It represents the highest closed real estate transaction on Flathead Lake, but the buyers are getting a lot for their money, as MTM found out during a tour last spring. The property sits on 22-acre private island, while the house itself is 22,000 square feet. The main house has 5 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, and every detail represents high-end luxury. There's a wine cellar, target range, and a giant library with a 45-foot ceiling in the great room. There's also a boathouse, guest house, and a cabin.